Sten, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
Wonderful as usual.
So the last episode, we were kind of dissecting the Wisdom Project, which Dr. Marcus Stenemo was a creator of. And the last time we went through the productivity, half of it. Today, we have this intention of going through the remaining one. And we got some interesting cards down the line. So I'm just going to brief them before we comment on each one. The first one is the Ohio principle, which is using your to-do list as a distraction list, so you can avoid temptation by adding obstacles. And another card called single tasking compared to multitasking, which we talked about in the last episode. Parkinson's law implications, because there are many things to discuss when it comes to Parkinson's law. 2-minute rule. We got switching costs. We got effective study techniques. So I think we are good to say that this will be quite a interesting sequel to what we did last time. What do you think, then?
Yes, I agree.
So let's kick things off with the Ohio principle. And no, it's not the state Ohio we are talking about. We're talking about only handle it once. And it leads like this: dealing with email direct rather than getting back to it later and having to read the second time. So what are your initial thoughts when it comes to using this principle and how you implement your daily life?
For me, I think the email example is probably the best one. If you start writing it and then you get disrupted and then you come back, you end up spending almost twice as much time as if you just finish it off while you write, because you end up rereading everything and then having to check what documents did I attach. Is it the correct version of the document that I attached? So for most things, you end up spending more time if you take a break from it that is so long that you actually have to get back in. It's fine to take a short break, but if you get back to it the next day, you end up wasting more time than you realize.
Okay, and that's something that I can certainly agree upon.
There are cases where you want to read something and then you want to sleep on it and then you want to continue with it. I think that's a great way of solving a problem.
I think with that, we can move on to using a to-do list as distraction. What does Stenemo mean by that? He provides an example, quote, writing down distracting thoughts, things to get back to after finishing current tasks, help focusing on current tasks by clearing the mind, end quote. Do you want to comment on it?
I think that for many people, it will speak for itself. But to be clear, this is really about how for some people, it can be quite track to have 10 things they know they have to get done today. And they can feel overwhelmed knowing that there's another 20 things they have to get done this, and they don't really know where to start. And then they feel like, I want to postpone it till tomorrow. And that can be a very vicious cycle of feeling overwhelmed and thereby coming rather than just writing it all down, saying that, yeah, I can do this 5 things. I don't actually have to do all these 20 things today. I actually have quite a lot of time tomorrow. Just writing down and then focusing on these are the important things that have to be done now. And then the rest of these things can be done when I have time later or low energy.
Yeah, that's a very good way of be able to have this kind of initial grasp of the entire reality, so to speak. And that's pretty much the core message and benefit of the non-stop capture, link in the description. Because if you don't have kind of the other perspective on it, like you have this kind of high level view, then it's quite hard to know that which ones will be dealt with the best at the moment, which one can be postponed and all that stuff. And that's a thing that is probably the main benefit of the can-do list, which I also talk about. I believe it's the difference between tasks that you should or must do at a certain point that are like real obligations, and tasks that are like something that you could do at this moment, but you're not really obligated to it in the same way. And using that can-do list as more of a distraction list is, according to me, a great way to sort of have multiple options ahead without needing to commit to each of them. Because that's a thing that I do quite frequently too. Whenever there's some kind of small task popping up in my face, Google this or YouTube that or whatever, to simply write it down. Because when you do it, you don't need to remember it anymore. And it's only by not needing to remember it that doesn't really torment you in the same way. So these are like the distracting thoughts again. And I guess that you do a similar protocol.
Yes.
So let's move over to the third card. And this one leads: avoid temptation by adding obstacle. An example is place TV remote, for instance, in drawer. And I guess that we already have touched upon it, but do you have any additional insights since we last recorded?
Yes, I think that it's really something that people do way too little, is to add an obstacle when they have the mental energy energy, and then signing out of your account where you spend too much time in the morning, where you know that this morning routine is being ruined by this app I spend time on. And by just forcing yourself sign out that account before going to bed, and then in the morning seeing that, oh, I have signed in account. And if you want to make it really hard for yourself, you could have a really tough password that you do not have available apart from written down, and so that you actually have to go to that place to put in the password. By making it that hard, you really add an obstacle that makes it easier for you to avoid the temptation. Still, you of course could have it as after I've done my morning routine, then I can spend 10 minutes on this app that I find very, very fun, but I know it's not really giving me the good start of the day that I want. So then you can make it into a reward and having a hard time to get to it before you've done whatever you want to get done for. Another example could be that you have a book to the bedstand, and you know that if your phone is with you in the bed, you're not going to pick up the book. But if you have a Kindle in your bedroom and you leave your phone charging another, and then you basically end up doing what you want to do. So that's another good example of adding obstacles when you feel like it, rather than being forced to stop doing what you enjoy doing and then to do the thing that you think that you want to do, but that you're not currently wanting to do.
Yes, so I call it some kind of selective filtering when you are either, we saw in this example, adding more frictions in order to get other activities easier firsthand, or you can simply make the other ones easier. So instead of having this miscalled willpower, somewhat unreliable in my opinion, it's good to perform some kind of environment design. But you mentioned a specific app, and if I understand correctly, most of that would probably refer to social media, right?
Yeah, I think entertainment or social media, common one. It could be anything that feel like this game is taking my energy in the morning, or this game is fun, or this taking more time than it should.
So with that, let's move over to single tasking card. There are really two steps. One is decide the most important task, and two, give it 100% attention till it's 100% completed. So it's like, okay, first you see a particular activity and then you give it 100% attention. So do you want to comment on it?
Yeah, I think it's, as you say, it's quite straightforward. Two steps, and it's quite clear what a single task refers to, is that put a single task as the focus of your mind. And by doing that, really make it easier for your mind to make progress towards finish. It's basically the opposite of having 10 different things that try to, where it's beyond your possibility of make progress on most of. And single task, depending on situation, can be really efficient. I think we mentioned last week how you wouldn't listen to an audiobook while trying to write an email.
Yeah.
So there are definitely cases where doing single task for an audiobook where you listen at 3 times speed and then writing an email.
Very helpful to know in which you have to pay more attention to it. If you just put it on autopilot, it's good to distinguish between those. One thing I want to mention before we move on is like when you single task, I mean, there really is 3 different pieces of this step-by-step advice, if we can call it step-by-step. First is deciding, 2 is like the attention part, and the 3rd is completion part. And I absolutely agree that whatever you do, you should allocate like the most attention you can muster at that moment. But I feel like when it comes to the deciding part and the completion part, although it like in general, it seems like it's quite good. I feel like when it comes to deciding, many people, including myself, could sometimes feel like, okay, now I need to make a perfect decision. And I'm not sure what to do about these 20 different options that probably in the can-do list. And what I usually advise both myself and other people, it's like, okay, you try out one. And if you feel like you want to switch, then you switch to another and just do some kind of trial and error fashion. So what I'm saying is that to make it easier to decide which task, you could allow yourself the option to switch to another task in that list, because then you don't need to feel like you have huge commitment. But of course, if you liked it all along, you should of course like complete, but there are still exits in my opinion that would probably make it easier to be in action all the time. And just the last thing, like whatever causes you the right behavior is the ultimate way to do it. And if it's like rapid trial and error fashion, like doing some kind of gliding on slippery floor towards a certain outcome, that would be the best. And based on experience, I think this kind of relentless doing and feedback would yield most results. So what do you think about this slight modification of it?
Yeah, I give a good example of where in some cases there are better alternatives. So I would say that for most of these cards, as you say, there are cases where these are the best solution, and then of course it's only the best solution for certain individuals, certain situations. And I think it's good to be aware that there are always exceptions, and there's always a case where there are 3 different tools, and in this specific case you can use either. It's really up to what energy you have or what kind of other tasks you have.
Yeah, and let's not also forget that these are rule of thumbs after all. They are not really meant to be perfect, but just simple enough to grasp, and okay, now I know how to execute it like properly and stuff like that.
Yes, it's really a mental tool that you should be aware of. It's like knowing that there is a hammer, but you also have a nail. And in some cases you would want a hammer, but you should know that there's always an alternative. And just being aware of that really here. It's not knowing that, oh no, now I always have to use a hammer.
And the funny thing is, you don't need an engineering engineering degree to use a hammer, right?
No, exactly. All you need to know is how to and when to use. And for many people, I think some of these things they've heard of many times, and some things they've never heard of. Because for some reason, that specific tool isn't very popular in their social circle.
Yeah, so now we got 4 cards left, and I think we should go through them in a more rapid pace. And since I'm probably the one who is slowing down, this is certainly a reminder to myself. But let's come back to Parkinson's law again, because there's an implication here. Quote, if you set aside too much time to finish, it takes longer time to complete. So what's the solution? Break down projects to small tasks and to set short deadlines. Some brief comment about it?
Yeah, so Parkinson's law, as we know, is quite big issue for many people, that you have until the summer to do something. And then for some reason, you do it a week before it. And it's so common for some people that they feel like they are procrastinating, something that they identify as, because this always happens. Many people. And I would say that there are so many different solves. And knowing this Parkinson's law, just knowing is really makes it obvious what kind of are need to avoid. And so here we talk about two. It's that you want to have a project that is very clear for what is the next. So every small task. If you know that you have to, if you want to go for a vacation and then you have to prepare by, let's say, getting a new pass sample, then you actually have to book getting the pass. And there are many other steps you don't really realize, right? And just doing that in not the week before, because then you will not get your pass. Doing it way ahead of time by knowing that this is the deadline where I actually have to have my pass by today. Otherwise, I do not know if I will have it time. By having that, then you end up planning in a much better way, because you have a clear task and a clear deadline. And the deadline that's set for your other project, that basically, I can always do it next. That's the problem. That if you don't set a short deadline, that really is, I have to be done by this. You don't have if you don't have an accountability about it, that you say that on this day I will tell you this information, or I will give up my project, then it's very easy to put it off. So here it really, there are many ways of applying solutions. Just breaking them down by writing it out, as we mentioned, on a to-do list. That's one way of doing it, but do it in other ways. We mentioned last about having it in your calendar and then seeing that, oh yes, I can count the week for, on what week do I have to get done? What is the absolute deadline, so that I know that I can do it the week before the deadline. And then if something comes up, it's fine to postpone it one, but I know then it's more urgent. And then the same thing with having like that. It really depends on the project situation. What are the circumstances you have for this big project? So a short deadline can be a month. A short deadline can be 2 hours
or 2 seconds. Not really, but I think your comment was very elaborate and very insightful. So I'm not going to do any follow up on it. But one thing I want to mention in this setting is that in this card it has a video explanation and complementary video explanation. And that's something we haven't got before, but that's probably a new or somewhat new features that applies to certain cards. Could you just briefly tell our listener what it means?
So for most of the cards we've talked about in an upcoming update, every card will have one link with a good source really explaining kind of what we're doing now. So for example, here we talk about there are 2 complementary videos that really give good background Parkinson's law and give a few more examples and motivation for why it's so important to know it and how to apply it. And I think for many people, listening to multiple sources for learning this will be good. So that's why I've added several links.
Great. So now we got 3 more. The first one, which to me sounds like very, very useful for many people, is the 2-minute rule rationale. 1, it is common to not want to do something for starting and to enjoy it after a few minutes. And before Stenemo comments, I just want to say that it's probably the crisp reason why you should aim for momentum rather than motivation. Because if you somewhat imagine like, now I need to feel a certain way before acting on it, it's much harder to do it in that way. You almost need to be somewhat delusional in a positive sense. But if you start acting on it, then you feel this kind of sense of everything is moving in the right direction, then it makes it so much easier, and that creates motivation on the spot. So do you have any other thoughts on it?
I think you said nice.
So since we already talked about momentum, we should mention this card. And since we already talked a lot about it, we should, about the phenomena in itself, should probably keep short. But there is a switching cost when multitasking or being interrupted. This is because the brain performs worse when switching focus back and forth tasks. And once again, you keep in mind that it is when there are tasks that require like same kind of tools like answer email or something else. So the solution is then single tasking, talked about earlier. Plan a time, focus on one thing at a time while not allowing interrupt. Any thoughts before we move on to the last one?
I think it's good that we just have this as a reminder that this is really why we shouldn't be multitasking in some cases where it's very easy to end up tasking. Say that someone is, there's so many examples of people ending up multitasking without realizing it. And I think it's good to know that this really is the cost that you pay.
Yeah, exactly. It's good to have the second order effects in place. So let's finish off by something that is very applicable to all the, adolescents and early 20s people, as well as probably more towards higher level education. But that is effective study techniques. There are 3 different kinds. And I just just want to say that these ones are probably the best ones that exist, so really wonder. The first one is generation, means you test yourself for learning. And this is because if you don't know where your gaps are, it's much harder to know which one will stick. But if you see that, okay, I don't know that, let's fill it in, then you have more incentive to remember future. So that was the generation effect. The second is spaced repetition, review with increasing time intervals, which is kind of what Anki is for. Yeah, this Anki card deck could be a good example of it. Third one is interleaving, vary what study in the same session. And last one, which is my favorite, active recall, which recall information from memory, e.g. flashcards and Feynman technique. And Feynman technique, if you don't know, it's like when you try to explain to another person who doesn't know anything about the topic at all. So you really have to go down to simplicity. And the more simple and specific you get, the more you actually understand the fundamentals and how it grows together with other concepts. And I just want to say that you don't need to necessarily say it. You can, for instance, like write it on social media or on your blog or in other kind of platform, get this kind of effect of now I need to produce what I previously learned to others in order to solidify for myself. So do you want to comment on these four very brilliant techniques, in my opinion?
No, I think you summarized quite well. These are some of the most underused and most well studied. So it's surprising how few people use and how few people know that these actually have quite a lot of research showing that in many circumstances they are useful. So I think, as you say, they are good, complementary, and I think they are surprising when you read about how important they are for not just learning a specific type, but all learning.
Yeah, exactly. That these kind of fundamental principles will be different brain. So now we cover through the entire productivity as it looks like right now. And we can always add new cards, you remember. And the following categories are still left to explore in upcoming episode. One being cognitive biases, quite a large one. Second one is communication, quite a small one. General knowledge essentials, happiness, and health. All of these five we covered very soon. But I just want to ask a very quick question whether we should tackle one of these next. Do you have any thoughts on the best one to select after productivity?
That communication links quite well with this. I think should go for communication. It is something that very underappreciated among people who are interested in productivity, where a lot of productivity really comes from being good at communicating.
Yeah, and that's, you said it very, very well, in my opinion. That's all about like communication, both for yourself and also for others. And we might have some time for general knowledge essentials too. So with that, there are ample reasons to anticipate for the next episode. And until then, I want to say once again, thank you so much, Stenemo, for partaking in this episode.
Thank you.